few opening remarks from me. As you know, TASC, Think Tank for Action on Social Change, our core focus is economic inequality. And today, we're looking at the challenge of economic inequality to recovery and to well-being. And we have more evidence than ever about inequality. So, of course, the work of Thomas Piketty and many of his colleagues in putting together the World Top Incomes database from tax data from a number of countries provides us with new evidence about the top 1% and their income share. You can see here the trend, the red line, in the United States of America. Levels of inequality there now going back to levels not seen since the 1920s. And all of that implies in terms of a dysfunction in the economy, in terms of a lack of spending power for the vast majority of people, but also political questions about the concentration not only of money and wealth, but of power in the top end of society, and increasingly democracy, there's a hefty bill to pay in order to be a participant. But of course we see that the Irish line is moving in the same trend. There's only a few data points from the 30s and 40s, but you see inequality in Ireland from the mid-70s has grown in a very similar trend to the United States. And there's no evidence based on existing policies, taxation, wages and otherwise, to suggest that that trend is going to halt anytime soon unless more decisive action is taken to do so. So since the mid-70s, real incomes in Ireland have doubled, but they've tripled for those in the top 10%, and they're 5 times higher for those in the top 1%. So what we're seeing is an increasing divide in Ireland between those who have good jobs, full-time and good pay, who can afford to have a comfortable life, let alone a life of dignity, whereas many people are working full-time on low pay, as well as part-time work, and of course, over 300,000 people who can't find employment. And we know that there's 26 people looking for work for every 1 job vacancy that arises during the year. So an increasingly polarised situation with divide between those who have and who have not got opportunities to work. And that has lots of deep knock-on effects in our society as well as in the economy. Another way of looking at that is that the bottom 90% has been losing an income share from a height of 73% of all income down to a low point of 64. That's 9 percentage points, or in real terms an eighth of income available to the bottom 90% of society is an enormous shrinking over 3-4 decades, which reduction in real spending power, reduction in real quality of life. How do we explain that? With forces of technology, globalization, eroding jobs, robotisation replacing workers, a loss of those kind of manufacturing jobs or construction jobs more recently, which would be in the middle of the income divide. So again, an increasingly polarised situation. Just a few statistics here to talk about the depth of the social division. More than 20% of workers in Ireland are categorised as low wage by Eurostat, whereas less than 15% would be the Eurozone average. 1 in 5 people are living in a jobless household due to unemployment, the lack of jobs, but also due to disability, long-term illness, or care duties that prevent people from entering into the labour force. I mentioned the unemployment statistics and the fact that there are so few job opportunities available. There's been a focus on activating people, but what's the point of activating people and cutting their welfare to goad them into work if there are no jobs? We have to look at the real economy, the need for investment, the need for putting more money in people's pockets to have wage-led growth if we are to provide the jobs for people. It has to be on both sides of the equation. We have nearly a quarter of young people who are not in education, training or employment. And of course we have great regional disparities in Ireland, with the northwest and the southeast having the highest rates of unemployment and youth unemployment. So in this context, there's a lot of misplaced talk about cutting the higher rate of income tax. That's something that would only benefit 1/3 of income taxpayers, and less than 1/6 of all adults in Ireland would benefit from a cut to the higher rate of income tax. There are much more equitable things that could be done, and TASC has recently produced a paper on defensive taxation which outlines some of the options in relation to tax and tax reform. And just to capture one of the core aspects of that analysis, Ireland has a low tax triangle. People say they can't afford to pay any more tax. They're already under such huge pressure, and that's true, because we have low taxation, which leads in turn to low service provision. Many services that would be provided in other countries are not provided here, so people have to reach deeper into their own pockets to pay the little extra top-up in health, education or other services. Or things like childcare are entirely pushed back onto families. We know that Ireland has the highest childcare costs of anywhere in the world. Elder care is another issue. So the high cost of living makes it difficult for people to imagine that they could possibly pay more tax, even though Ireland's tax levels are only 3/4 of the European average. So there's a real trap there, and there's a need to have movement on all 3 points of the triangle if we want to increase taxation, and there is scope to do that on higher earners, to provide services that will lower the cost of living for people in a virtuous cycle, as well as putting more money into the economy. And I'll say a bit more about that later on today, but I don't want to interrupt proceedings. I just want, before I hand over to our first session, just to give thanks to our partners, FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, who is, this is our 5th annual conference together. We do a range of other activities with FEPS. We're very grateful for their partnership with us. Likewise, the Carnegie UK Trust is the sponsor of the next session, and my colleague Cormac will say a bit more about that. And of course, we're very grateful to the Atlantic Philanthropies and the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, who continue to provide core support to TASC to help us with our work. But as you've seen with the desk outside, we're certainly keen to have your support as well, and there's opportunities to sign up both today and on TASC website if you want to be a supporter to help us continue to be an independent voice to take on these issues to do with economic equality and to produce evidence-based policies and alternatives that are applicable to Ireland here and now. And again, I'd like to thank everybody who's involved in helping today, and I'll say more about that later on again. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Cormac Staunton, who's going to take you through to the first session. Cormac.